So Apple's new iPad Pros came out a few weeks ago featuring the new M1 chip found on their latest MacBooks. And I've been using this iPad Air for a while now, but I finally got my hands on the iPad Pro. So today let's compare the two tablets and see which one you should buy as a student. So these two iPads are probably the most talked about and compared ones, especially for students who are looking for something a little bit better than the entry-level iPad 8, but not the top-of-the-line 12.9-inch iPad Pro, since that one basically costs more than most laptops. To not waste anyone's time, the key point in this video is that both iPads are really great for students and fun to use. So if price is an important consideration for you, don't be afraid to save yourself a few $100 and pick up the iPad Air 4 instead of the new iPad Pro. That said though, there are definitely a few features that the iPad Air is missing compared to the new iPad Pro, so depending on how important these features are to you, it might be worth it to pick up the iPad Pro. So be sure to keep watching for a more detailed breakdown and comparison of the two iPads. As always, we're starting off with the physical build and design of the iPads, and as you can see, both of these are extremely similar in appearance and size. They both have the flat-sided design with uniform bezels and protruding camera bumps, albeit in different sizes. The biggest difference in overall build is that on the iPad Air you get a few more cool colors to choose from besides the classic space gray and silver, and I have the sky blue one here, which looks really nice in person. Both of these iPads use USB-C to charge now, which is great, but one key difference here is that the iPad Pro has Thunderbolt 4 built in, so that makes it a lot faster for transferring data files and potentially more external display support in the future. So if your workflow requires importing a lot of footage or transferring a lot of data often, then having the iPad Pro with Thunderbolt 4 might save you a lot of time. Another main difference is that the iPad Air 4 uses Touch ID to unlock on its power button, while the iPad Pro uses Face ID. Both systems work really well for unlocking your device, so it really comes down to your preferences here. Overall though, the two iPads are so similar in build that they're compatible with the same accessories and cases like the Magic Keyboard and of course the Apple Pencil too. The last small difference to point out on the build is that the iPad Air has slightly thicker bezels than the iPad Pro, just because it has that 0.1 inch smaller display at 10.9 inches versus 11 inches on the iPad Pro. It's not a super noticeable thing, but if you look at them side by side, you'll notice the difference. So that brings us to comparing the displays next, and again, both devices are really similar in a lot of areas here, from color accuracy to sharpness and pixels per inch. The most noticeable difference here though is that the iPad Air 4 has a 60Hz refresh rate compared to the 120Hz refresh rate, also known as ProMotion, that comes standard on the iPad Pros. This is actually one of the main reasons that I would consider getting the Pro over the Air, just because once you get used to a faster refresh rate on your display, it's really hard to go back to the slower refresh rate because it starts to feel a little bit laggy. But to be honest, I wouldn't really notice if I wasn't comparing these iPads side by side. And like I said, I've been using the iPad Air for a while now, and I previously used the iPad 8th generation. So both of those had a 60Hz refresh rate display, and it was totally fine using it throughout university. Besides that, the iPad Pro is also 100 nits brighter than the iPad Air, but that's already pretty bright enough for most scenarios you'll be using it in, even in outdoor or direct sunlight conditions. So again, there's not too many differences between these two tablets, at least on the display side of things. So that brings us to performance, which is arguably the main differentiating area between these two iPads, since one is supposedly the Pro or professional model. As mentioned before, the iPad Pro is powered by Apple's new M1 chip, which is also found on their new MacBooks and iMac with either 8 or 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is absolutely insane for such a slim and portable device. The iPad Air, on the other hand, uses Apple's A14 Bionic chip, which is actually from the same generation of processor architecture, so it's not bad or slow by any means, but the M1 chip definitely beats the A14 chip on paper in almost any scenario. But in actual daily use, I found that a lot of apps and parts of iPad OS itself aren't optimized to take full advantage of the M1 chip yet. I even waited until iPad OS 15 was revealed at WWDC yesterday to see if anything would change in terms of making the iPad Pro more compatible with its powerful hardware, but it seems like for now the iPad OS software will continue limiting the iPad Pro to being a secondary device that Apple wants you to use along with a MacBook or another laptop. So personally, for now, I wouldn't be able to replace my actual laptop or PC with an iPad Pro, so the extra performance offered on the Pro over the air doesn't make too big of a difference for me. Don't get me wrong though, the iPad Pro is extremely snappy and fast in day-to-day use, and you can definitely feel that it's a bit faster than the iPad Air. But for most of the tasks that I do as a student, I can't notice a big enough difference since the iPad Air is already so fast. So on the performance side of things, if you're a creative professional or someone who does a lot of intensive work on their iPad, then maybe you might be able to take advantage of the extra power offered on the M1 chip. But for most students, including myself, having the extra performance on the iPad Pro will probably only benefit us by serving as extra future overhead if we plan on keeping the iPad for a long period of time. Finally, we're moving on to some of the small differences between these two devices that I haven't covered yet. One of the more important things here is that the cheapest iPad Pro comes with 128 gigs of storage, while the base model of the Air only comes with 64 gigs. I think that's more than enough for someone using the iPad as their secondary device, but if for some reason you feel like you need more than the 64 gigs, then that might be a reason to consider getting the iPad Pro, since if you upgrade the iPad Air storage to 256 gigs, that brings it a lot closer to the price of the iPad Pro. In terms of other differences, the iPad Air has a single 12 megapixel rear camera, while the iPad Pro has an extra wide angle lens one. But that honestly means nothing to me since I've never taken real photos with my iPad before. What's a bit more useful though is that the iPad Pro now comes with a 12 megapixel ultra wide selfie cam. There's this new center stage feature that basically tracks your face with the new camera to follow you around on video calls, which is pretty cool to have. The two iPads also have similar battery lives, lasting me around 8 hours of usage with relatively high brightness, so definitely enough to get you through the day. Finally, the speakers on the iPad Pro are a bit better than the iPad Airs because it has 4 speakers instead of 2, but I still wouldn't use them to listen to music, so if you're just using the iPad speakers for watching movies, I think it doesn't make too big of a difference, but again, it's a nice feature to have. So that's about everything for the comparison between these two iPads. The way I see this as a student is if you won't even be replacing your primary device or laptop with an iPad as a student, then the iPad Air and even the cheaper 8th gen iPad is more than powerful enough. Just between these two iPads though, both of them are powerful enough to last you a long time as a student, and paired with the right accessories like the Apple Pencil or Magic Keyboard will help you get any work you need to do done. So again, just to wrap things up, I would say go for the iPad Air, and with the $200 you save, buy yourself accessories like the Apple Pencil or Magic Keyboard, since those also add up to be pretty expensive, unless some of the extra features on the iPad Pro really catch your attention and you feel like it would change the way you use your iPad. In that case, you can try and go for the Pro. Be sure to comment down below if you have any questions or suggestions. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.